Do you want things to work out perfectly all the time? Well, today's story is about adultery, brokenness, seeking perfection, and finding out what God's grace is all about.
I started out kind of as a dreamer and uh, had all my life planned out the way I wanted it to be, dreamed of the perfect spouse and the way I wanted to live my life. And, um, you know, I kind of had this mentality of if I did right, believed right, chose right, then things would work out, accordingly. And, and I kind of forgot to account for broken people. I forgot to account for sin that makes its way in. And when I was 4 months pregnant, I found out my husband had been having an affair. It kind of just shattered my world and my perception of my future. I think I was dealing with shock. I was pregnant with twins. I just didn't know what to do with my new reality. I felt broken myself. I didn't see a way through. It was very lonely. I felt misunderstood. So it was just a really dark time.
And so, how did you get through it? I mean, here you are, pregnant with twins. Were you at that point relying on God? What were you doing? Relying on yourself? What was happening?
My attempt was to rely on God. I'd grown up in a Christian home, and I knew that was the solution. So I was trying to do that. However, because, and this is what I talk about in the book, because I had this plan for my life, I kind of grew up expecting God to be in agreement with it. I kind of thought this will be his plan too. And so when it wasn't, I was kind of lost and what is God's plan for me? So I was trying to rely on him, but then I also started to try to fill the void. I tried to find value and self-worth. And so while I'm reading my Bible, I'm also trying to find self-worth through exercise and eating. And that kind of became an eating disorder. So I would like to say I fully relied on my faith, but I really didn't. I was trying to rely on my faith, but holding on to things that I thought could also give me value.
Yeah. And so, where did that lead you?
Not good places. So I started struggling with perfectionism, even OCD type behavior, germophobic behavior, just trying to seek control in a life that felt out of control.
Mm-hmm.
So I started exercising, which grew into this eating disorder because I realized I had control over the numbers on the scale. And when they went down, I felt great. And my self-worth went up. And when they went down, my self-worth plummeted. So I just kind of entered into this roller coaster ride. But then, as I also talk about in the book, perfectionism is a disease that spreads. And it's not only affecting the way you see yourself, but the way you see others. It controls the grace that you give towards your spouse, towards your children, and towards those in the world. And that's really what happened to me.
Mm. So, writing this book, what would you want people to know about this book?
Um, it's really just to let them in on my own journey. And I'm praying, I'm hoping that they can see themselves in it because I think we all try to seek fulfillment or try to seek to be the fulfillment of somebody else. And I don't think that was ever God's intent. So I'm hoping when people read this book that they're able to see themselves as a broken person, to be okay with that, and then to ask what the mission is God has called them to in that state.
Mm.
That's kind of the point for all of us.
Yeah. Do you get a lot of people like contacting you about this, like that they've been going through this, and how did you get through it, and questions like that?
That has been the biggest blessing of my life is people I've never met have started sharing their stories and just saying, I felt so alone. And that's part of the thing I wanted to raise awareness in the church is that, you can walk into a church of 300 people and still feel completely alone.
Mm.
And that's a tragic reality. I think we're not great at asking hard questions, and not, intentionally, but I think we just don't know how. We don't know how to dig deep, and we don't want to dig deep within ourselves, because those are some scary places to go. And so I'm hoping to just raise awareness of, hey, let's get real for a minute, and let's talk about how hard life is.
Yeah.
We're all dealing with it. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah. And you almost like when you're going through it, I'm thinking that you probably feel like so rejected, right? You feel
Yes,
like, like, what did I do? What personality flaw do I have that this person doesn't isn't coming to me anymore, or they're seeking outside the home? Were things like that racing through your mind?
absolutely, completely full of self-doubt. And I think even growing up in the church, I questioned myself even more, because I really did feel like I tried hard to be a good spouse. And again, nobody's perfect. But then I just began to question and really believe the lie that Satan sold me, is that it is me. Something's wrong. I'm not right. And I have to go on a journey of fixing myself.
Yeah.
And man, that's a lie Satan wants all of us to believe, is we're not right the way we are. We need to fix ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. And then all of the other things come in too, like, you start to, despise maybe your spouse, and all those feelings come into play. But, how did you see God's grace through all this? I mean, you're in this place, and now, I mean, did your husband like stop the affair? What happened there?
Yeah, so he did stop the affair after a while, and that was helpful, but I still struggled with the rejection, and I don't know if that necessarily ever goes away. However, you know, time. I took a lot of time. We did counseling together, personal counseling, group counseling. And through group counseling is where I was kind of called out by my peers, and they were saying, you're holding on to this rejection, you're letting it define you, you're letting it be who you are, and you need to learn to let it go. You have to surrender it to God. And that kind of became my mission for that year. I realized, like I said, I was trying to serve God, I was trying to love God through that dark time. However, I was holding on to the very piece that was defining me, and I couldn't surrender that. And that was what was really holding me back from healing. So, through their call to surrender, is kind of when I began to experience what the grace of God looks like, and how I can extend that to myself, and then how I can extend that to my husband, and then others as well.
Mm. Well, in your book, you said you met a homeless man in Denver, and you saw brokenness in a different way. So how did that change you?
Yeah, I think, when you grow up in this perfectionistic lifestyle, you hold others to the same standard. If you have to keep up the act, so do they. And so in high school, when we went to feed the homeless and pray over them, we came to this man, and he was sitting over a sewer drain, warming his hands. And we came and offered him our last sandwich, and we were going to pray for him. And during the prayer, it was a February night. I was freezing. I had my hands stuffed in my pockets, and he took off his gloves and he gave them to me. And that was just a very humbling moment for a 17-year-old girl to realize, the very person that I had probably been judging, you know, turned around and selflessly gave his gloves to a girl who had never gone hungry, who had plenty of clothes in her closet, and who had never struggled like he had. And so it was just a moment of God saying, you know what? Stop looking at people in their circumstance and look at people, see their soul.
Hmm. That is amazing, amazing story, because it's true. People really have to look at the person's heart. Stop looking at them on the outside, right? God looks on the inside. That's wonderful. So through your life, were you always in perfection? Were you always a perfectionist, or did that, like, I mean, did you grow up in a family where there was an expectation of being perfect?
I don't think intentionally, but there was this idea, and I don't know if it was a generation thing, but there was this idea of keeping up the image, right? So you don't want to let people know that your family has battles. That was kind of the idea, and so I learned to keep battles a secret.
Hmm.
And then I think that's kind of where it started. And then in junior high, kids are quick to point out your flaws. And so that kind of became the starting point of me trying to fix those and make myself better. And then, when my husband did what he did, it was like confirmation of everything people had told me in the past was true. I wasn't enough. And
Hmm.
so it kind of spiraled into this trying life of 11 years of trying to make myself right.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Yes. Well, I'm gonna ask you a hard question. Where did perfection kick you in the butt?
Yes. So I noticed it one day with my daughter, unfortunately. I was homeschooling at the time, and she was struggling in math, and I was always someone who struggled in math. So I should have had compassion and empathy with that. But that was kind of the deepest moment of my perfectionism. And so I needed her to give me value. I needed the way that she performed, her behavior to give me value. And that sounds terrible and it is, but that's how deep I was. So I ended up just yelling at her, what is wrong with you? Why can't you get this? And I saw this look of horror on her face, of her just realizing, wow, something's wrong with me. And I'm the one who told her that, her own mother is the one who said, basically, something's wrong with you. And just watching the look on her face and the tears in her eyes, I realized, what am I doing? I'm expecting something that she can't give, nor should she have to. That was kind of unfortunately my wake up call. So,
That was a hard thing to go through, wasn't it?
oh, heartbreaking. Yes.
Yeah. So now, is there anything that you would like to talk to my audience about when it comes to perfection? Is there like what is the damaging results of perfection?
Yeah. I touched on it a little bit, but what I want people to know is perfection is an infection. I almost titled my book The Infection of Perfection, because it is something that spreads. It doesn't stay within yourself. You become a controlling person because you're seeking control. And that feels safe, but it's the opposite. It's damaging. And so what I try to get people to do in my book is to take a step towards something that actually feels unsafe, and that's letting it go, and that's surrender. It feels like it's the wrong thing to do, but it's actually the right thing. And there's freedom in it. It's funny, we think of control as this safe place, but really, surrender is what gives us a life of freedom.
Hmm.
But it just doesn't feel like that's the way to freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, here's the book, The Pursuit of Grace, and you can know it by its original, crossing out the word perfection. Okay, so where can they find out about you and get a copy of that book?
Yeah, I have a website, pursuedbygrace.net. I'm also on Instagram at pursued_by_grace. And then I also have my book on Amazon and through my publisher, Karis Publishing.
Wonderful. And what would you like to leave my audience with today?
I would love everybody to understand that God is a God a pursuer of broken people, that you do not have to seek fulfillment through things or people, that God is pursuing you to be your ultimate fulfillment.
What are the effects of betrayal on your marriage? Trust, faithfulness, and devotion, but mostly love. And it seems like the person doesn't understand the weight of what they've done and how that marriage could ever recover. But it's not something anyone wants to face. But the Bible gives clear instructions on adultery. And in 1 Corinthians 6:18, Paul tells us, flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. So I say to you today, think about what your marriage means to you. Are you ready to forgive? Are you considering leaving? Why not hand your marriage over to the Lord and see what He will do? Do you listen to the call of God? Because God speaks to you every day. Are you listening to the call?
What sound is heard?